For 4 winters, Eleanor Hart had stood alone in the kitchen of this ranch while the world outside tried to bury her. She was 46 years old. Her hands were cracked from lye soap. Her husband's rifle still hung by the door, even though the man who had cleaned it every Sunday was 6 feet under a cottonwood tree on the South Hill. Gone 9 months now. Gone the way her daughter had gone 3 winters before that. Gone the way her brother had gone 9 winters before that. The list of people she had lost would make a long column if she were the kind of woman who kept lists. She was not. She kept fences. She crossed to the stove and set the coffee pot on. The wind had a sound to it tonight that she had not heard in a long time. It carried ice against the glass and the faint complaint of cattle huddled behind the barn. Before we go further, settle in wherever you are tonight. If you're listening by a fire with a cup in your hand, or in the kitchen folding laundry, or driving and waiting for the snow to lift, let us know in the comments where you're with us. We love knowing who is keeping us company. A knock came at her front door. She did not move at once. People in this valley did not come out in a storm like this unless they were lost or dying. The county sheriff had been the last to come, and he had come to tell her she ought to sell. He had stood on this same step in his polished boots and spoken softly about how a woman alone could not hold a place this size against the coming winter. She had shut the door in his face and listened to his boots crunch back to his buggy. She had not unlocked that door since. The knock came again. A fist hit the wooden frame hard, the way a man hits when his hands are too cold to feel how loud they are. Then a voice, young, trembling. "Ma'am, please. My sister." She crossed the room. She unbolted the door. On the steps stood a boy of perhaps 11 years, half frozen, his arms wrapped around a smaller shape bundled in a man's coat. The smaller shape had dark braids and a face the color of skim milk. She was not moving. Behind the boy, half collapsed against the porch post, was a man. A man she knew. A man who had ridden out of this very yard 9 winters back with a saddlebag and a curse on his lips, and had not written once. Not one line. Not one word in all that time. She could not say his name for a long moment. The wind had stolen the air from her lungs as grief used to. Caleb. He lifted his head. He had aged 20 years. His mouth moved. What came out was almost nothing. "I couldn't make it back alone." She took the child from the boy first. The little girl weighed almost nothing at all. She carried her inside the way her arms remembered carrying someone, the way she had carried her Ruthie once across a flooded creek, for years gone now, the way she had carried her 1,000 times in dreams since. She laid her down by the fire. The boy came in after, silent, soaked, not looking at her, as if he were afraid she might send him back out into it. Caleb did the last 10 feet on his own. He did it the way men do when their pride will not allow them to be carried, even when their leg is broke, even when blood has made a dark stripe down the side of his boot. He made it to the chair by the hearth and sat down heavily and would not meet her eyes. She did not ask yet. She brought the cot out from under the stairs. She cut the wet coat from the little girl and wrapped her in 2 quilts and her own shawl. She made a poultice of flour and pine sap, the way her mother had taught her for fevered children. She got the boy a bowl of beans and a tin cup of coffee poured half with milk, the way her husband had poured it for the hired men. She did all of this with her hands. She did not speak, because she knew that if she spoke, she would cry, and she had not let herself cry since the funeral. When the child opened her eyes and looked up at her with something like recognition, the way children look at grandmothers they have only heard about, Eleanor felt her whole chest go hollow. "What is her name?" "Hope," the boy said. "I'm Abel. She's 7. We've been walking 8 days." She nodded. She brushed the hair from the child's forehead, and she felt the world tilt 2 degrees off its old cruel axis. Movement 2. When the little one was asleep again and Abel had been given the pallet by the stove, Caleb finally spoke. He told her about his wife. He told her how she had died bringing hope into the world in a sod house in western Kansas, and how he had blamed the child for it for nearly a year, and how he had carried that blame until it had hollowed him out, and then one morning she had looked at him from the cradle with her mother's eyes, and he had understood that there was nothing to forgive. He told her about the writers, about how a man had come to him at the trading post 2 months back with a thick wallet and a thin smile, about how the man had offered him $100 to keep riding west and never come back to this valley. "I asked him why," Caleb said. "He said some folks in this county don't want the Hart name on this land no more." She sat down across from him. She understood who the man was without needing to be told. Elias Varn had been circling her ranch for years. He owned every spread for 3 miles north and 4 miles east. He wanted her water. He wanted her south pasture, where the spring rose clean even in the worst drought. He wanted her to give up and wander off and die quietly the way widows are supposed to die quietly. And he had been trying to buy it from her, and now he had been trying to buy her blood out from under her. "What did you tell him?" she asked. "I told him to go to hell." She had to put her cup down. She had to turn toward the window for a moment so he would not see what his answer had done to her. He went on, quieter now. He told her that 2 nights later his cabin had burned with most of what he owned still inside it. He had grabbed the children by the hand and walked out with nothing but the clothes on his back, the rifle he kept by the door, and the money he kept sewn into his coat. He had walked east because east was the only direction he had not betrayed. "I cursed you when I left," he said. "I cursed your name and your land, and the day Father gave it to you instead of to me. I told you I'd die before I came back to it." "I remember," she said. She did not say it cold. She said it the way you say a thing that is no longer true. "I won't," he said. "I won't die before I come back. I've already come back. I'd like to stay, if you'll have me on it." She turned back to him. The fire was low. Abel was breathing slow on the pallet, one arm flung out over the dog that had wandered over to him and was sleeping against his ribs. Hope was curled in the quilts like a small fist. "You mended the fences last summer," she said. "The ones along the south boundary. The old boards Father used to lay." He blinked. "You saw me?" "Of course I saw you. You're bad at fences." He laughed. He had not laughed in a long time. The sound of it cracked open in the room, and she felt something she had not felt since before Ruthie died. She felt as though she had been holding her breath for years and had only just noticed. Outside, the storm was still coming down hard. The wind had a sound to it tonight that she had not heard in a long time. It carried ice against the glass and the faint complaint of cattle huddled behind the barn. She had heard this sound years ago, she realized, the night her daughter was born. Snow falling on a quiet house, while something new arrived in it. He had walked 3 days on a busted leg to drag his sister's keeper to her door. He figured he could manage one more apology and a few harder ones after that. "It was never Father's land to give me and not you," she said. "It was Father's land to give us both. You were owed a piece of it. You are owed a piece of it still." He did not argue. He took his hat off finally and set it on his knee, and he looked at his hands, and he looked like the boy who had taught her to ride when they were both small, and she felt a tenderness so sharp it almost hurt. "You'll stay," she said. It was not a question anymore. It was the sound of a house becoming the right shape again. "You and the children. You'll stay." Movement 3. On the 3rd morning of the storm, the riders came. 6 of them. She saw them from the south window. They came up the lane in a slow, deliberate line, their horses picking through the snow. At their head was a man on a gray horse that cost more than most spreads in the county. He wore a coat with a fur collar. He wore gloves. He did not look like a man who had been out in the weather longer than he had to be, and the men behind him did not look like men who had been out at all. Elias Varn had come to finish what he had started. Caleb was on his feet by the time they reached the porch. His leg was wrapped, his face tight. Abel had the rifle down from the wall before Eleanor could turn around, and she had to take it from his hands. She had to look her nephew in the eye and tell him that this was not yet the kind of morning for a boy of 11 to be carrying that weight. Hope woke behind them on the cot and looked up at Eleanor with those eyes again, the eyes that looked as though they had known her since before she was born, and Eleanor felt the floor of her stomach go out from under her. The grief she had been managing for 9 months was about to be asked to do another shift, and she was not sure she had it in her. What would you have done in her place? Would you have opened the door for a brother who had cursed your name, or shut it the way she had shut it on the sheriff? Tell us in the comments. We'd love to hear what you would do. She opened the door before they knocked. Varn dismounted slow. He had a piece of paper folded in his gloved hand. He held it out without expression. "Your taxes are 6 months in arrears." He said it the way a man reads scripture he does not believe in. "Plus the fine for harboring a vagrant. We're here to take possession in the name of the county." "Where is the sheriff?" she asked. "County business." She did not look at the paper. She looked past Varn at the men behind him. 6 of them. 6 men and a piece of paper and the assumption that there was no fight in her left. They did not know about Caleb. They had not expected Caleb. The boy inside with the rifle. The little girl inside who had the stubborn mouth of her mother. "My brother is inside," she said. "He has a legal right to be here. I'll pay the taxes I owe, and I'll pay them to the man whose job it is to collect them, not to you. You're trespassing on my land right now, Mr. Varn. You and every man behind you. I have a witness." Varn smiled. It was a thin smile. "You have a widow and a broken house. I have a woman with a brother and a nephew on her porch. I have a rifle. I have God watching, which is more than he is doing for you at the moment." She did not flinch. "Now tell me what your real business is, because it isn't taxes." The silence that followed was the kind men hold when their bluff has been called by someone they had not bothered to take seriously. Behind her, Caleb had stepped onto the porch. He was leaning on the rail, his leg bound, his arms folded. He was smiling too, and there was nothing friendly in it. "You tried to burn him out," she said. "You paid him to keep walking. You burned his home. And then you sent these men to my door to take what was left. You're going to answer for every one of those things." Elias Varn owns 3 counties. One of the men said from behind the gray horse. He said it like a man reciting something he had been taught. She did not look at him. She looked only at Varn. "Not this one," she said. "And not this morning." Then she did something none of them expected. She turned back to the porch, raised her hand, and waved once toward the south lane. She had not expected anyone to come. She had waved on no signal, had made no arrangement, had not so much as sent word. But she had waved 3 times in this life when she was in real trouble. Once when Thomas had cut himself with a plowshare. Once when Ruthie had come down with the fever the night the doctor could not get through. And once now. And there was movement at the bottom of the lane. Movement 4. The storekeeper from town came first. Jonah Brand, who had not set foot outside the county road in 7 years, and who had been the first to tell Eleanor she ought to sell this place before it killed her. He came in his spring wagon with the canvas half up, and behind him came the widow across the valley, and behind her came the old cowboy who had worked for Thomas and who had been paid off the day of the funeral with a handshake and nothing else. Behind him came the 2 brothers who ran the livery. Behind them came 3 more she recognized from town, and 2 she did not, a girl and an old man, both bringing shovels and a chain. They came up slow through the snow. They did not speak. They stopped at a distance and waited. Varn looked at them, and then he looked at her, and he understood, for the first time that morning, that he had made a miscalculation. She was not a woman alone in a broken house. She was a woman who had been alone in a broken house for a long time, and who had just now stopped being alone. Jonah Brand climbed down from his wagon. He walked up to Varn. He took the paper from Varn's gloved hand, looked at it, and tore it cleanly in 2. "The taxes are paid in full," Jonah said. "As of this morning, by 12 separate households in this valley. The county sends its regards." Varn stared at him. He stared at the riders behind him. He stared at the men and women at the bottom of the lane, all of them holding shovels and lanterns, and one man holding a double-barrel shotgun that had been his father's. If this story is moving you, you're exactly who we wrote it for. A like and a subscribe tells us to keep telling them. We see who is here. We hear you. "What do you want, Mr. Varn?" she asked. Her voice had gone quiet in the way that her father's voice had gone quiet when he meant the final word on a matter. "I want you off this property," he said. "No," she said. "You want my spring. You want my south pasture. You want to put 100 head of your cattle on land my husband cleared with his own hands. And you've been wanting it long enough that you believe wanting it is the same as deserving it. It isn't." He did not have a reply. The men behind him were looking at one another. 2 of them had already begun to turn their horses. They had come up the lane as muscle, and they had not come up the lane expecting witnesses or shovels or a woman who did not flinch. One by one, they peeled off. The gray horse stamped once, and then its rider pulled it around. Varn looked at her a final time. "You'll regret this." "No," she said. "I won't." He turned his horse, and he left. The 2 halves of his paper drifted in the snow behind him and were gone by morning. Movement 5. By noon the storm had broken. Sun came through over the south ridge and turned the new white blinding. The men from the valley came up the lane and helped her and Caleb mend the worst of the broken fence line. They cut wood. They fed cattle. They did not stay for coffee because they were shy, and because the thing they had done that morning was the bravest thing most of them had done in 20 years, and they were not yet ready to talk about it. But the girl who had brought the shovels left a basket on the porch. Bread, still warm, and a jar of honey, and a note that said simply, "Welcome home." They came inside that night. Caleb sat across from her at the kitchen table. He had the cup in both hands. The coffee was strong. Hope was asleep on the cot. Abel was asleep on the pallet, the dog still against his ribs. She could hear the cattle lowing softly in the new cold behind the barn. She could hear nothing else. The house, for the first time in 4 years, sounded like a house. "I cursed you," he said again. "I know. I don't know how to make that right." She looked at him across the table. He was smiling that not quite smile of his. He looked like her father. He looked like her Ruthie. He looked like himself. "You came back in a blizzard," she said. "You brought your sister's 2 children home to a woman who might have shut the door. That is how you make it right. Day after day after day." He did not answer for a long time. Then he nodded once. What happened next did not happen all at once. It happened the way new fences go up after an old one has fallen, board by board, post by post. Caleb learned the south pasture. Abel learned the rifle, then unlearned the rifle, then learned the lasso. Hope learned the chickens, and the chickens learned her. Within a year there were 3 names on the deed at the county seat, and within 2 years there were 4, when Abel married a girl from the valley with a steady hand and a laugh like his mother's. Within 3 years the South Spring had been fenced and protected by a written agreement signed by every household in the valley. Within 4 years, Elias Varn had lost his hold on the county. He never set foot on her land again. He tried to sell the spread north of her once, and no one would buy it. He took to sitting in his fine house and watching his money shrink and his name thin, and on the last night of his life, years later, he was heard to say to no one in particular that he had misjudged the Hart women. The town changed too. The window of the general store no longer held gossip about the woman up the way. It held jars of her honey and seed packets she'd saved from her husband's row garden, and sometimes a clipping from a paper 3 counties over about the horses she was breeding on the south pasture. Calm ones, kind ones, the kind of horses that did not shy when children came near. But that is not the picture. The picture is this. It is a Sunday morning 7 years after the storm. The kitchen of the Hart Ranch is full of light. The snow has come early this year, and it sits fat and clean on the sill outside the window. There is coffee on the stove in a pot that has not been empty in 7 years. There are 3 cups set out, then a 4th, then a 5th, because Abel's wife is expecting and the doctor has said it will be any week. Hope is 16 now, and she is braiding her own hair by the fire, and she has her mother's stubborn mouth and her father's quiet laugh and her aunt's hands, which have always known what to do in a hard moment. Caleb is at the table, watching her. He has a line of white at his temple that was not there at the storm. His leg gives him trouble on cold mornings, but he does not mind. He is reading the Bible his sister gave him when Hope was baptized, and he is smiling at a verse he has read 100 times. Eleanor is at the stove. She is humming a song her mother used to hum. She has flour on her cheek. She does not wipe it off. The house is not quiet anymore. It has not been quiet for 7 years. It is the kind of full that hurts a little if you remember what empty used to sound like. Small things are the big things, if you pay attention long enough. Snow on the sill. Coffee for 5. A girl humming with her aunt. A man leaning against a doorframe as if he has decided to stay. Next, we'll tell the story of a one-handed rancher who was told he could no longer ride, and the mute widow who saddled his horse for him every dawn for 6 months until he believed her when she said he could. Give us a moment. We'll see you there.